Thank you for joining us today at Naturally Scott. I'm Scott Harris, and I'll be your host on this journey as we discuss birds, wildlife, parks, nature, and the environment. At least once a week, I'll bring you the very best of America's spectacular world of nature, from birds to mammals to reptiles and amphibians, from soaring mountains to endless plains, from rugged coastlines to rivers and streams. Every episode will feature an expert guest, a ranger, a researcher, a birder, an author, a biologist, or an adventurer, someone who has seen what we want to see and been where we want to go. This isn't just another nature show. It's a safari for your eyes and ears. Now let's get started on today's adventure. And as always, stay curious. Hello and welcome to Naturally Scott. I'm Scott Harris. Great show coming up for you today. I've got Jeff Gordon as our guest. And a lot of you might know Jeff back from his time over a decade as president of the ABA, and we're going to talk about that. But we're going to talk about a lot of different things, and Jeff's got some stuff he's asked me to make sure to bring up, and I want to do that. And he has spent his lifetime studying nature, and actually we can kind of start with that. It goes back, I believe, Jeff, from previous conversations we've had. Jeff's a guest in my book, Why We Love Birds, so you can read more about Jeff when the book comes out, and there'll be some stuff that he shared in there that won't be coming up today. But it was your mother and the Delaware Nature Society, I believe, that kicked off your lifelong love for nature.
Yeah. My mother was one of the first volunteer guides for the newly formed Delaware Nature Society. Back then it was the Delaware Nature Education Center. It was formed the same year I was born, in the mid-60s.
Which was?
1964.
Okay.
And so she had a really intense interest in wildflowers. This organization got started, and boy, it sounds a long time ago, and it was a long time ago in many ways. People were noticing that as fewer and fewer children coming up had access to things like farms or larger natural areas, that even then, way before digital screens or anything like that, there was this concern about what's now popularly called like nature deficit disorder. Our kids and even the adults are losing touch with nature. And that was the specific impetus for forming what is now Delaware Nature Society. And she would be leading activities for second graders or something, taking pokeberries and making them into ink, and then taking like Canada goose feathers and making quill pens and, writing and stuff like that, or just more like nature walks kind of thing. And I, as a 5-year-old, would get sort of dragged along, and then just over time kind of got the full treatment, did the young kids programs, and then later was part of their teen program called the Junior Naturalists. And that was one where we took some really exciting longer trips, including a trip to Florida's Everglades when I was in 6th grade. And it's funny because, I am most known and I feel most comfortable with birds, but for a long time, when you're going from like age 4 or 5 to age 12, that's a big chunk of life there.
Yes, it is.
I was kind of lukewarm on birds. Like, they just seem small and flitty and confusing and hard to see. And I was really interested in birds like bald eagles and peregrine falcons, but they were so rare at the time. That was kind of their low
It was the
ebb
DDT
with the
period,
DDT
right?
and
Yeah.
eggshell thinning. That was a red letter day. I very well remember seeing my first bald eagle. It was a huge event. My grandparents had a place in southern Delaware, not too far from the ocean, but it was on a tidal creek. And this will also date the scene a little bit. That tidal creek, which is kind of brackish, even a little salty, used to freeze on the regular. Doesn't really do that much anymore. But
But there is no climate change.
Exactly. And those houses falling into the ocean in Ocracoke, that's just
those
mysterious.
People in North Carolina are just out of their mind.
But anyway, looking out, and I probably was about 5, and seeing a bald eagle sitting on the ice one winter day, and it just, burned in my mind. But somehow I just didn't catch on. I like seeing the birds at the bird feeders and stuff, But yeah, I went with
Didn't
this
you
group.
tell me in one of our earlier conversations that part of that was the number of birds was overwhelming to you, the number of species?
The combination of the number of species and the fact that they were hard to see.
Okay.
And we had binoculars around the house, but they were sort of like, old ones that my dad would take to the racetrack sometimes or something. They weren't the incredible starter binoculars we have now.
It's amazing, the technology. Now, also, you mentioned 6th grade.
Yeah.
Wasn't it around 6th or 7th grade that your father got you a camera? And didn't that
Yeah,
help a little bit with transition?
that was an absolutely huge bridge to focusing on the birds. And he first, in classic fashion, gave me his old Argus C3, which was a rangefinder camera. Kind of has had a little bit of like vinyl records are
I
kind
was
of
just
back.
gonna say, like classic vinyl LPs.
Right, exactly. But the manual film advance, and if you weren't paying attention, which is hard to do when you're 12, you'd wind up with
Half
triple
a
and
frame.
quadruple exposures and all this
Yes.
stuff. And
Yep.
but yeah, no, I used that thing, and I was really into astronomy at that point, and I was using it to take pictures of stars, and I was going out and seeing my first comets and things like that. And then so the photography thing got going, and then we picked up some of the early Olympus OM cameras, which also are kind of back around again in a
You know
different
what?
format.
They really are. They come up a lot in recent conversations.
Yeah,
Greg Miller's an Olympus guy.
they seem to be doing a really good job. I mean, I think a lot of the manufacturers are recognizing that wildlife and birds is a legitimate market.
Yes. My wife and I took a Nat Geo expedition up in Alaska in June,
Okay, yep.
which is, by the way, if you get a chance to do that
Mhm.
it's just an unbelievable thing because they're pretty particular about not wanting to be called a cruise, and it's not a cruise.
Mhm.
There's not big buffets, there's no TVs in the room. Where there were 91 guests, and my only disappointment on that was when we signed up for it, they had talked about how they had a camera room and a Nat Geo photographer on board,
Mm,
and you had all this equipment you could test. And I'm a Sony guy; I shoot Sony,
yep.
and so I was looking forward to trying some teleconverters and some different things. Well, by the time we got on board, they had signed a deal with Olympus, and now they're 100% Olympus. And so all the equipment they had was Olympus. Like, come on, guys. I mean, I've spent months waiting to test these different lenses and stuff, and now you've kind of changed that. Great news for Olympus.
Yeah.
Uh, and we're doing another Nat Geo down in the Galapagos in September, a year from next
Mhm.
month. But I'm prepared this time to not look forward to any Sony equipment. So yeah, I guess Olympus is they're pushing hard and
Mhm.
good luck to them. I mean,
Yeah.
the people I know that use it seem to really like the equipment. Do you still have that old camera?
I think I do actually.
This is not just about birders. I mean, certainly there's a focus on birds
Right,
and
sure.
whatnot. It's megafauna and insects and moths and,
Mhm.
plants and parks and the whole thing. But it does seem to me that birders are a sentimental group. I think I mentioned to you when we were talking about the book that almost everybody that I knew that was, let's say, 60 or older that I interviewed for the book still has their first field guide. And a lot of them still have their first camera, you know, whatever that might be.
Hey,
And
it's your axe, man.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I've still got early guitars, and I mean, yes, these are material objects, but like as I often say, people will talk about, oh, birding, it's just kind of casual, silly, fun thing. It doesn't really make much difference. But I really think if it's true, that thing about like when you die, you get like a highlight reel of your life. I think a lot of the people I know, that highlight reel is going to have a lot of things on it that happened when they were out looking at animals and plants and out in nature. I think a lot of the highlights will involve interactions they had with other people they were sharing those times with. But
Absolutely.
this is meaningful, powerful stuff. And
I
it
think
forms a lot of core memories for people. And it's like a souvenir of it or something.
it absolutely is. And I understand, in the birding world, as you're
Hmm.
well aware, there are listers and non-listers, and
Right.
there are people that'll play soundtracks and people that won't, and there are people that shoot photography and others that think it takes them out of the moment, and there's, as in anything, things become tribal, and as long as no one's trying to impose that on someone else,
Yeah.
no big deal. Now, I got invited over the weekend. On Saturday, I went out on an 11-hour trip in South Carolina. We went out of right at the border of North and South Carolina, but we went out through South Carolina. And they
Hmm.
don't have pelagic trips in South Carolina. And I think it became evident why over the course of the 11 hours. There's just not a lot of birds. I mean, there's no guarantees, but we did see 5 pelagics. And for a lot of the people, those were 5 lifers.
Hmm.
And for listers, there were state birds and county birds and, there are all those different things. But I found myself watching the people over the course
Hmm.
of the day. I really can't stand on the railing of a boat for 11 hours with binoculars looking off. It's like a hawk watch, right? You're looking for a dot a mile
Right.
off and
Right.
praying you can identify it. And is it black or gray? And,
Hmm.
is there white on the underwing and that? So I was watching the people. And of course, 21 different people on the boat. So there's 21 different styles of birding and 21 different approaches. But the most memories I'll take away from the day are of those people. A bird would fly away 300-400 yards, and there'd be 3 or 4 guys with some pretty good cameras, and they're snapping pictures. And as soon as the bird's out of sight, everybody's gathered around the cameras trying to figure out what it is.
Shaping.
And,
Yep.
I think it was a blast. And you're right. Those are great memories. And sharing them with people, I think, can oftentimes. I do love solitude. Now, I'll take a chair and a cigar and just go find a great place to sit, and I'll bring a book and a bottle of water, and I'll sit for 3 or 4 hours and just kind of see what happens. And as you know, probably better than I do, the longer you're quiet and not necessarily immobile, but fairly stationary,
Hmm.
the quicker the surrounding animals say, you know what, I don't think Jeff's a danger to us. I think it's cool if we go back to eating, and whether that's the birds or the squirrels or a deer walks by or a raccoon kind of curiously comes up, those are amazing times. Those are the
Yeah.
moments that when people say, I don't know why you go out there, I don't know what you see. My God, if
Hmm.
you just shut up and sit for a half an hour, you can
Hmm.
be overwhelmed by what you see.
Yeah. I had a real interest in hunting when I was again in that kind of like 12-year-old kind of phase. I went through all the hunter safety training and everything. And then my parents kind of got nervous about me actually getting a gun.
That's a
Anyhow,
significant part of hunting, right?
well,
Or at least a
unless you're
bow and
gonna,
arrow.
yeah, unless you're archery or something. But um, so I didn't have a ton of experience like camoing up and sitting in blinds or whatever. But when the like mid 2005, 2006, whatever it was there, the volunteer search effort in Arkansas for the Ivory-billed woodpecker, I did that, and a number of people I know who big birders did it,
I've got to
and
interrupt you. Do
yeah,
you believe that ivory-billed woodpeckers are still alive?
no,
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 you're convinced they're
yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Just
and then
curious.
I it's one of these things I think you got to add right in the same breath. I would so love to be proven wrong. I
Yeah.
mean, it would be the most delicious bite of crow that I ever had to take.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, but no, I'm afraid you just look at the preponderance of evidence and what the other relatives of the ivory-billed woodpecker that are still around behave like, and how generally easy they are to hear and see. Yeah, I think you gotta say the last ones that everyone agrees on were Louisiana in the mid 1940s, and
But isn't it
I know
kind of
not saying it's the last, but
no,
yeah,
and
by
I
now,
respect that, and I think that's probably the majority opinion. But isn't it kind of fun to think there might be a little family tucked away in some
oh yeah.
neck of the woods, and that maybe one day we'll stumble upon them? I mean, I think that's a little bit of the flicker of fun.
Well, I think it is fun, and the idea that there's things that are undiscovered, which is indisputably real. I mean, the amount of stuff we know is, a fingernail's worth, and the amount to be found. I do think too, like with the ivory bill, And I'm not sure why exactly it's the ivory-bill versus the Eskimo curlew or the Carolina parakeet or whatever. I mean, the recency of it and was right here in the US. But I think there's this thing of if they persist, well, maybe we didn't screw up as bad as we thought. It would be like a kind of redemption kind of thing.
You
And
know,
we're
yeah,
not hoping for that with Labrador duck or great auk, really. I don't think there's many people that hold out that hope, but ivory-bill seems like one that maybe, just maybe, we didn't put a shit over the cliff.
it would be nice, wouldn't it?
It would be
It would be
lovely.
nice. Maybe, we might consider that, part of the pendulum swinging just a touch,
Hmm.
which I'm becoming actually more optimistic about. We try not to make this show political, so I don't want to
Hmm.
go down that road, but certainly we're not at a great place for environmental leadership in that area right now. But there are some efforts, and I think people are starting to understand. I mean, the lights out program, to save the birds from hitting windows,
Hmm.
the wilding stuff going on that I think is pretty cool. And some of these things where we understand the value of microhabitat. At the same time, you've got, like a Yellowstone to Yukon, hope for wildlife corridor. So people are thinking in macro and micro, but as they understand that maybe there's some things they can do on a micro level, declawing your cat or keeping your cat inside or putting
Hmm.
a couple of stickers on the window, some pretty simple things that can have a dramatic impact. And maybe there's some room for optimism in some of these areas. I mean, if nothing else, Mother
Hmm.
Earth has shown that she is remarkably resilient. I mean, we have spent a lot of time doing what we can to screw it up, and I still think we can come back. And I think we may very well might do that. So
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, and this is one of the things that, like, birders and I think wildlife, people, we tend to love nuance and we tend to love detail. And when you're out there in the political realm, which I don't tend to directly wade into, but, slogans and memes work better, and certainty or the appearance of certainty tends to work better in that kind of mass theater. And, you know, I think the difficult but also hopeful truth on a lot of this stuff is, some things are hurt and some things are helped, and it's always a mix. I do think it's fair to say, though, that the changes that human beings make to the environment, building houses, roads, et cetera, they disfavor the survival of many, many non-human species. And the species that they favor tend to be stuff we're not thrilled about, like Norway rats, lice, things like that, things that really do well with the changes we make.
Is
So
is there not a US, Friends of the Lice organization?
there probably is. And, yeah, I mean,
I'm gonna get 3 calls from huge fans of lice, that this is the
well,
role they play in the environment, and this is
yeah.
why they're critical. I suppose there's
But
somebody that loves mosquitoes.
that is the thing to me, is the balancing point, and trying to make smarter decisions, trying to make more informed decisions, because, we're not going to stop building houses, and
Nope.
goodness knows, we need places for people to live. We need to, feed people, all these things. But I hope what we are shedding, and hopefully quickly, is the idea that clean air, clean water, and open space has no value, that it's essentially an unmetered utility that we can just take and take and take.
Yes.
And even that something that isn't developed is somehow a problem. Like, it's almost borderline lazy or sinful to not extract what's there.
Right.
I think if we could, and I think it is happening somewhat, it's funny. It's always a back and forth, and things come around in a different form. But I absolutely think there's reasons for optimism.
Well, I do, and I think that as some of these organizations, and I spent my career in marketing, so,
Hmm.
I see things, that's the prism I see things through.
Hmm.
And I think part of the challenge is, if we're trying to get people to make the decisions that give this world a chance to be healthier and stronger for all of us
Hmm.
is to recognize that there are going to be roads and houses and manufacturing, and that some of these things are not net beneficial to nature the way we want it. But when you have these people that go out and they don't think that, anybody should ever boat for pleasure because of the carbon footprint, or, we should all somehow go back 500 years in our
Hmm.
development, things that are not going to happen, I think they deter us from focusing on the big stuff, because then people who are necessarily, or not necessarily, but might tend toward being lazy and don't really give a crap, they can dismiss it by saying, that's just some progressive left-wing nutcase that wants me to go back and live in a cave, and I'm not
Right.
going to do that. So now I don't care about the environment. But if we can say, look, we're going to have these things, the critical part is to find balance and to do it in as healthy a way as we can with the least amount of damage we can, while frankly allowing human beings to live a comfortable life. You know, it's 90
Absolutely.
something degrees outside here this morning at 10:30. I've
Hmm.
got my air conditioner on. I'm
Right.
not apologetic about it. I
Right.
don't want to be outside in, 90 degrees with some humidity. But on the other hand, I don't want to, kill a bunch of things to just for my own personal comfort. So,
Right.
mm,
Well, I think, this kind of marketing approach and yeah, trying to turn a buck off everything, I think, including things like state and national parks, I think you can get into some red zones pretty fast.
yep.
But I, have always really advocated that if we get people directing resources, time and money at wildlife, that the market is going to respond to that demand with more supply.
Yes.
And, I think this is something that is better understood on the hunting and angling side, that there is sometimes on the quote unquote non consumptive term that I think a lot of us have some issues with. I'd rather, I'm not really suggesting this, but I'd rather think of birding and stuff as like lightly consumptive than non consumptive, because I think it gets you into this unproductive chasing this horizon of like zero impact that
Yes.
is, it's just unrealistic. And again, it's not like the choices between people going out pleasure boating or birding or on a safari versus sitting at home writing letters to their elected representative about environmental health. The choices between those kind of activities or going to the mall or, doing some other thing where wildlife and open spaces aren't going to be prioritized. And I'd rather have more people saying, I really enjoy having these parks, having these refuges because they're amazing. And, some of the best times I have in my life are in these places.
Yep.
And to me, that's the way you really, and I think it's cool, this homegrown national park kind of effort, that Doug Talmy and others are doing, of trying to get people to add native plants and other features to their own property. That's all cool too. Great stuff. But yeah, I think it's more of a
We
give and take. The idea that we're going to have no impact is, I don't think it's a helpful
Right, and
idea.
trying to make people feel guilty who don't maybe take it as far as you do is, to me, is asinine, because normally that is generally not a great motivator. It's generally a
No.
great way to turn people off. Like, we have built, my wife loves gardening and she loves plants and she loves flowers, and she pays attention to whether they're indigenous or not, but she's certainly not hamstrung by that.
Hmm.
But we did take a piece of our property, we turned it into a bird sanctuary.
Hmm.
Everything's indigenous, and we let things overgrow to a point where she wouldn't be comfortable if it was on the whole property.
Right.
But, that's the compromise you reach. And we are blessed with so many birds every single day, and squirrels and rabbits and chipmunks and deer and all of these things right in our front yard in this bird sanctuary. And it's my little slice of heaven. I can go sit on my front porch with a cigar, sometimes with a camera, sometimes without, and fill up the feeders. And I'm not an anti-squirrel guy. I don't have any squirrel prevention. I find squirrels as enjoyable to watch as birds. Sorry for all the, people that disagree, but I love watching the chipmunks and the squirrels and everybody. And we can all build that little slice. Like, I look at it like the Victory Gardens from World War II,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, it's tough to feed at the time. I don't know what there were, 125 million people or something in the country, but it's tough. It was tough to feed them then, and we planted hundreds of thousands of Victory Gardens and made a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, I think we could do hundreds of thousands of little micro habitats that make a difference. And
Mm-hmm.
my wife bought an acre of land just down the street from us. We have pine farms here in South
Mm-hmm.
Carolina, and they come in every 20 years and cut it down, which obviously destroys a lot of habitat. And so she bought an acre of that
Mm-hmm.
on a corner coming into the area where we live, and we're just leaving it as it is. So everything around it was cut down, which is unfortunate. But our little acre stands there as our stand against the world. That's our little flag,
Right.
and the deer and the owls and different things are enjoying it, and makes it worth it.
Yeah. Well, and even people who don't have like a yard, there's often things like even your town or community or local park system encouraging them to, you know, go more native plants or at least avoid. I share your thing, like some non-native plants, I feel like they work for native wildlife and they're not the worst thing as long as it's not sort of like, I don't need to necessarily pick on barberry, but like barberry is the one for me that just, because it really hurts.
Mm.
My wife Liz and I were out at a mushroom foray last week up in Pennsylvania State Park called French Creek. And we got a little turned around off trail and had to find our way back through the trail around an old home site. And it was grown up with barberry and a little bit of multiflora rose for good measure. And that was, we gave some blood.
I was going to say, you'll pay a price. You'll pay a price. Well, speaking of being on trails,
Mm-hmm.
let's jump to, I believe, as a relatively young man, you spent some time on the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah. Yeah. I, went through 3 years of college at two different schools and just couldn't decide. I was, there was a lot of momentum in the direction of biology, but I was really interested in like English and photography and that sort of thing. And I took some time off, and it's a cliche, but I said I'm gonna hike the Appalachian Trail and figure out what I want to do. And miracle of miracles, it worked. I only hiked the southern half of the trail. I hiked from Springer Mountain, Georgia to the Maryland, West Virginia line
I
at
think, by the
Harper's
way, I'm going to
Ferry.
have to correct you. The sentence should not be, I only hiked the southern half of
Well,
the Appalachian
it's still a
Trail.
long walk. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's a
couple
pretty
months.
significant thing.
But yeah, no, it literally, and I can even remember it being right in the sort of North Carolina, Tennessee border and doing this long descent. It was a hot, humid day. And one of the banes of trail hikers is these gnats that want to get in your eyes and get in your nose and stuff. And these gnats, but I was going down the slope and I just thought, you know what? I'm going to go back. I'm going to finish my degree and I'm going to become a bird tour leader. And that's absolutely what I did. And one of those things when like, the universe gives you exactly what you're looking for. And I was looking for a way forward and I found it.
That was what you've described to me as Act One, right? That was a Victor Emmanuel, a dozen years of guiding and stuff. So I do want to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Where does your trip to the Dry Tortugas and Ken Kaufman and a Tropicbird fit into the timeline?
Well, I think you'd asked me about one of my favorite days of birding.
Yes. Yep. And I want to, by the way, when you tell that story, which I'm excited to share with listeners, that book was focused on birds. So when you're done with that story, if you've got a favorite day of mammals or herps or something else that you want to share, jump on in because our listeners are not bird exclusive.
Sure. Thinking right away of East Africa, and a bunch of other things, Baffin Island in Canada. And anyway, when I got started working for Victor Emmanuel Nature Tours, I had a pretty good familiarity with South Florida, so that was one of the tours I was offered the chance to co-lead right away, and then in subsequent years took it over and led it. I think every year I was with Vent.
Which was about a dozen, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, from like 1990 to 2002,
Okay.
approximately. Um, so um, I think the part of the trip I was most looking forward to was the Dry Tortugas at the end, which are these little islands between Key West and Cuba, where sooty terns and brown noddies and mass boobies and a bunch of things nest. That this is
In
far,
huge numbers.
yeah, far and away. The boobies not in huge numbers, but like the rest, yeah. And it's it's the easiest way in the United States to see these things, and it's just it's such a spectacular tropical isle kind of thing in this old Civil War era fort. Anyway, one of the rarities, one of the prizes that you hope for on a trip for the Dry Tortugas is the white-tailed Tropicbird. And some years they get them pretty regularly and some years not at all. And that first year, that was my most wanted bird. And man, did we look for it. Steve Hilty and Ken Kaufman were the other leaders. And we would, post vigils from the top of the fort and scan. You were talking about scanning the horizon for dots. I mean, until your eyeballs are running down your cheeks and
Did you
the
get a
whole
lot of
bit.
frigate birds?
Oh yeah, and watching them go after the mass boobies and making them disgorge fish and stuff is pretty cool. But yeah, we were out there for 2 days, and then sailing back on the final day. And at some point you make peace with, well, I guess we're just not going to get it. I mean, we saw so much other cool stuff, and boy, the snorkeling just blew me away. That was a game changer. But that very last, coming back through the Gulf Stream into Key West, seeing, shearwaters and terns and things like that. And we just kind of pulled right up next to Key West, Fort Zachary Taylor. We could, see bathers in the surf and everything. We're just right off Key West. And this guy, he was a cardiologist from St. Louis, Bob Krieger, looks up and goes, well, that's a tropic bird. And it's one of these things where, like, did I just hear what I thought I heard? And, everybody looks up and, right, clear blue sky, no weird weather, anything like that. There's this white-tailed tropic bird just circling over the Key West shoreline and over our boat. And boy, that, one of the things that's so great about going out in nature is, yeah, there's the comforting old friends that turn up. But like you realize quickly when you get out, miracles happen all the time,
Yes.
or at least stuff that's highly improbable. And it's worth always remembering that it's unlikely, but it's not impossible. Something about that 11.999 hour appearance by that tropic bird was just, it was miraculous.
It is. And I think, I'm sure you've had people say this too when you've shared some of your stories of things you've seen over the decades. Oh my God, Jeff, you're so lucky. And in a way you are.
Hmm.
But part of it is you just got to be there.
Mhm.
As cliche as it is, 90% of it is showing up. If you're hiking through the forest, if you're, skin diving at Dry Tortugas or whatever story you're going to share now about your non-birding favorite day, you gotta be there to see those things, to experience it, and there's no guarantee. You can go out and get skunked, and as cliche as it is, so, I mean, a bad day with no good birds is better than any day in the office, and just getting outside and seeing what there is to see, and I get that all the time, "Oh, Scott, you're so lucky you saw this, or so lucky you experienced that." Yeah, in part, but in part, I'm not sitting home watching Friends reruns, you know,
Absolutely.
and where there are 0 surprises.
Hmm.
And I think the surprises are a large part of it. When you go out on a trip, whether it's a birding trip or, maybe you're going to tell us about an African trip, you've got a list of things that you're really hoping to see, right? That you're
Hmm.
counting on seeing. And it's fun to see them. And as you said, it's fun to see things you've already seen.
Hmm.
And then it's a blast to look for stuff, that is not guaranteed, maybe not even likely, but still possible.
Hmm.
And then every once in a while, you're sitting on the deck, packing up your backpack, getting ready to download and, thanking everybody for coming out on the trip. And suddenly there's a white-tailed tropicbird
Mm.
soaring over your head completely out of the blue. God, that's just amazing.
It is. And it's, you know, the more you get out, the more you develop this sense of just how odd that is.
Yes.
I mean, and that was one thing I really liked about tour leading is you get to go repeatedly to these places that for most folks are, truly once in a lifetime dream destinations. And you get to go there year in and year out. And yeah, in a certain respect, it's like the clients are amazed at that tropic bird, but like I can tell you the next decade plus that I led that tour, that never happened again.
All right, fair enough. Now, I've given you no time to think about it, or nor did I tell you I would ask, but
Mhm.
your favorite non-birding day outside? What?
Okay, well, I'm gonna because this is what came up first, and sometimes it's a good thing. And I guess I'm in sort of 11th hour mode.
Okay.
Um, and I'm gonna tell you one of the most challenging trips I ever faced as a tour leader, and it was while I was working with Vent. Um, we were trying to help open up a new destination in Nunavut. A lot of birders might know Churchill, Manitoba, in the kind of southwest corner of Hudson
For
Bay.
the polar bears.
Yeah. Okay. And specifically, like in the fall, when the ice is reforming, the bears migrate. They spend the summer when the bay is melted on land, and the ice forms first at Churchill. So they sort of migrate around the bay shore and wait at Churchill so they can get back out on the ice early and start hunting because they've been, eating blueberries instead of seals for
Picking
months.
through the town dump, and
they're very hungry. Yes. So this was on the other end. There's an area that comes off further north on the western shore of Hudson Bay called Wager Bay. And
Wager.
yeah, like a bet.
Okay.
And it ices out later than almost anywhere else. So the bears in June tend to concentrate there because they can get in an extra seal or two before the ice breaks and they're forced back on land. And the idea is you tried to time your arrival there. And I think Dan Gurovich and a bunch of other wildlife photographers had very good luck with this. The lodge is on the shore, the ice breaks, and they take you out in little boats, and there's bears on little ice floes and stuff of the breaking ice. And it was, by the photographs and everything, it's just a spectacular polar bear experience, like just spectacular. So I was fortunate enough to get to lead the first trip up there. And we went, and Arctic weather is famously it vacillates from one extreme to another. Well, this year happened to be a late ice out. Okay, and so we fly a little twin otter, land on this gravel bar in the middle of nowhere, and go to the lodge and everything, and the whole bay is frozen. And obviously enough, you're not getting a motorboat out onto the ice. And so we were kind of stuck, and there was some hiking to do around, and there were a few nice birds, nothing super iconic. One thing we did see that was extremely special was Arctic wolves, like nearly white wolves. Saw their footprints, saw them. That was incredible. But it's kind of like Thanksgiving dinner and there's no turkey. It's like, and you're just sitting around and looking, out the lodge window at this ice, and you're stuck. And my group, I have to say, they were very philosophical about it, took it really well. But I did see some other groups that kind of overlapped with us. I saw some tears and some very, very disappointed people.
Well, and along those lines, for a
Mhm.
lot of those people, that was a once in a lifetime, save up for 5 years bucket list thing.
Absolutely.
And so
No, you can understand
Yeah.
It's a terrible card to be dealt.
Yeah, blaming the guide becomes unreasonable,
Yeah.
but being disappointed, I think, is certainly something we can all
Oh,
understand.
oh yeah. No, no, no.
Yeah.
It's yeah. But so anyway, but we made the best of, I think we were there for about 5 days, and we made the best of it. And one thing I did a lot of there, this is all pre-internet and everything, was reading. And I read as much as I could about the habits of the bears in the local area. They suggested that kind of directly south of the bay from us and a little bit east was an area that had a particularly high concentration of bears. And so when the Twin Otter, the charter pilots, came back to get us, I kind of chatted them up and I said, hey, I've had these folks here, better part of a week. Nobody's seen a bear. I'm seeing that this area here that doesn't seem like it's too out of our way. We're flying back to a town called Baker Lake. It looks like it's not too far out of our way. Could we maybe just swing over that way? And, classic bush pilot fashion. They're like, oh, yeah, sure. We haven't seen a bear in a while. Like, let's do it, kind of thing. And we take off and we're going. And I'm trying to look out the window of this plane, and I have never looked for anything so hard in my life, looking to see a white bear on the white ice. And we get out there, and sure enough, there's a polar bear. It sees the plane and it's sort of loping across the ice. And I'm tapping. I'm in the seat right behind the pilot and co-pilot. I'm like, there it is. And I didn't expect what they did next, but it was a classic tour vehicle maneuver. They stood the plane on one wingtip. So from like trying to look out, suddenly we were pressed up against the glass, looking out on this side.
Now, how many people?
Like 7 or 8, maybe about 10 people on the plane. And then they flip it over so the other side can see. A couple people would snap photos, and it's basically just, it looks like a chicken or something. Visually, it was a freaking polar bear. You could really see that it was a polar bear. And boy, again, like the 11th hour save, and just the difference between heading home, having seen that, and not having seen it at all was emotionally just huge. So
Wow,
that's a fond memory.
Yeah, well, that and the fact you survived the bush pilot, so that was good news all the way around.
Yeah.
All right. So when you left Finch, you did a couple of things, and then you wound up becoming president of the ABA, the American Birding Association, which you did for over a decade, but roughly 2010 to 2021.
Yep.
Okay. So, and I mean, you did some interesting things. You moved the headquarters. You did some stuff with Hawaii I want you to talk about. And so tell us a couple of highlight things of your decade there.
Okay. So, it was an incredible privilege to be hired for that job, and to work. I had first read copies of the ABA's Birding magazine in the library of the Delaware Nature Society, as a high school kid or middle school kid, looking in. And they used to have these little yellow paper inserts that gave you very specific directions to specific birds, and these legendary birds, mythical things, violet-crowned hummingbirds in Guadalupe Canyon in Arizona and stuff like this. And so, the ABA had been out there as kind of a dream for a long time. And then to actually be in that position was, it was really something. I think a couple of things. The organization coming out of that early 2000s, and you said, I did a couple of things between Vent and ABA. One of the things I did, I was very active with kind of the bird blogging scene and also the birding festival scene. And these were two things, the internet in general and birding festivals, that the ABA was slow to. And I think one of the main themes of the time I was there was getting the organization online and getting it kind of speaking to the community in the way that, the community wanted to be spoken to. That was a big thing. And this is just a small example, but like one of the things, the ABA used to have membership cards. And when I came in, a lot of people were like, well, when are we going to get membership cards again? And I have never liked membership cards. Especially as every store you go to wants to give you a card and everything. I just don't want that. But I had noticed that Cape May Bird Observatory and then the Houston Audubon at High Island, they had these sanctuaries, the Ray Farm or the Beanery in Cape May, and a couple of the oak mottes in High Island in Texas. And Cape May had a little sticker that you put like on your binoculars or whatever to show that you were paid up for the year and had access to that area. High Island, they had a patch, like an embroidered patch with a different warbler on it every year that you could clip to your shirt or, put on a jacket or a hat or whatever and show that you were current for that year. And I just thought, well, to me, those things are a lot more meaningful in terms of other people can see it and it's updating.
Yeah.
With High Island, different warbler every year. With Cape May, it was just
like
the
merit
same
badges from the days when we were scouts.
And I just thought, instead of that, let's choose a bird every year and let's have, original artwork for that bird and let's produce a sticker that people can put on their binoculars. And, I think that was a highly successful change. And the announcement of the bird of the year, became a real like social media event and something that people, still look forward to. And
how was the bird picked?
Well, you remember?
Well, let me ask you this:
I know conclave of cardinals that they had for the new pope.
Okay, well, I know your favorite bird was a great gray owl. Did great gray owl get a sticker?
No, owls. We eventually picked burrowing owl. In fact, that was the last year I was there. I was burrowing owl that Christina Ball did. And we knew we were going to do an owl, but there was a lot of debate about which one. Should it be great horn? Should it be long-eared? Vision for it was the ABA was really well known for things like five-striped sparrows and violet-crowned hummingbirds and, birds that are extreme, white-tailed tropicbirds, extremely rare and hard to see. And for helping people get to those things, which is a great fundamental part of the brand and should be. But I wanted to emphasize outreach to newer birders. But I wanted to kind of try to pick the birds that were charismatic enough to really be spark birds for people to really, kind of mint new birders. But we're also like, I don't want to sound snobby here, but like there are some birds, like not to pick on mallards or Canada geese or something, but like I think a lot of birders find that after a while, their tastes run to things that are a little less mass produced or whatever. So I was trying to hit that sweet spot of things that are accessible, but, still get everybody's juices going. So the very first one we picked, and it was a neat synergy. Louise Zamitis had already done a cover painting of an American kestrel in winter in the forest near the ruins of Tikal in Guatemala. And I have a lot of emotional connections to Tikal and just love Guatemala and that whole Petén lowlands of that region. And American kestrel to me was a great first choice because it's declining, but it's widely distributed. In some cases, it can be common. It's a familiar bird for people. And I mean, how many people realize that there is a red, white, and blue falcon, on the phone wire, probably within a couple miles of their house? And that thing of where birding or getting out in nature can just widen your horizons and open your eyes to, a whole unseen world.
Yes.
And so that was kind of the sweet spot we were trying to hit. And inevitably over time, you start to vary. When we had the 50th anniversary year, we felt we had to choose the red-billed tropicbird, which was the ABA's logo bird. And, that is a rare and esoteric bird, but we tried to illustrate it in the context. We actually had like, here's the bird in close up. Here's like a sort of omniscient, like God view of the tropic bird and the people on the boat below it. And then here's a close up of people on the railing, like sharing the sighting together and sort of trying to move the camera around. Birders, we've often like, here's the eyepiece view. Here's the perfectly blurred background, no distractions, perfectly front-lit bird. And I think the ABA and birding in general, we have not done as good a job as hunting and fishing and some other outdoor recreations of presenting the full panorama. And
Yep.
I would often say, like, it's birding magazine, it's not bird magazine. And if you open up a golfing magazine, you don't see an endless series of close-up pictures of golf balls. You see pictures of people out in beautiful settings doing things they love with people they love. And sometimes people they are very competitive with, but like, having these wonderful experiences. And I've been super gratified to see that kind of imagery come in more and more.
So if I can paraphrase, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that in many ways there is more to birding than birds.
Oh, absolutely.
Birds,
birds,
community, camaraderie, exploration, curiosity, landscapes, parks,
discovery,
dinners afterwards with friends.
Yep.
Okay. Fair
absolutely.
enough. All right. Hey, now you had mentioned in a broad sense that Vent was Act 1 and the ABA was Act 2. And the last time we talked, you were trying to figure out Act 3. You're going to figure out what you were going to be when you grew up. And since I'm guessing you haven't hiked the Appalachian Trail, and I know you're a writer and a photographer and a naturalist and environmentalist, have you nailed down Act 3 or are you still playing it as it comes?
A little bit of both. I do anticipate getting back out in the field and leading some more field type experiences. I am also, endlessly fascinated with new media and social media and stuff, and trying to find ways to use that where it doesn't use you. There's a balance there. And but yeah, I'm really looking at that kind of little bit broader kind of focus again on nature.
Okay. Anything you can share with us? A website you can direct us to, or is it still in the formulative stages?
Yeah. No, I mean, right now I'm leading trips sometimes for the Delaware Nature Society.
Okay.
Yeah. No, stay tuned. But yeah, having stuff where, I think at the end of the day, it really is the getting out in nature, getting out together. I often find that I am more satisfied with a trip where I see a lot of birds, but like I move a little slower and concentrate more. And I'm less concerned with trying to run the table. And, that's always been an interest of mine, is trying to maybe dig a little deeper and be a little more experiential. So,
okay,
my mind is running those tracks.
Well, you know what? When we have you back on as a guest, and I fully intend to do that if you're gracious enough to accept, you can update us on how that's rolling. Now,
Thank you.
This is a new feature that I'm adding to the show. The last person I interviewed, we haven't posted it yet, but by the time yours is up, she'll be up with Cy Montgomery. And I'm just calling it Pick a Book. So if you were finding somebody who maybe their eyes were awakening to something outside of their living room, they were beginning to sense that, man, I got to get outdoors a little bit and see what's shaking. It could be birding, could be just hiking through trails. What book would you direct them to? What book do you think would be a neat book for a new burgeoning naturalist?
Man, wow, that is really
An unfair
tough.
question without any preparation.
Yeah, no, I'm actually, if it's okay, I'm going to mention a book that sort of served that role for me.
Absolutely. I think the listeners would love that, bringing that personal touch to it. I mean, everybody can say Rachel Carson's Silent Spring,
Yep. Yep.
which isn't a bad choice, by the way.
No.
Don't
Absolutely.
misunderstand, guys.
Yeah. And, I think about some of the classic nature writing, like Arctic Dreams or Of Wolves and Men by Barry Lopez. I love those books, but they're maybe a couple years down the road when you're more into it. But for me, as a 10, 11, 12, 14-year-old kind of kid, I just loved the Yule Gibbons books, Stalking the Wild Asparagus and Stalking the Blue-Eyed Scallop, which was about seafood and beaches. And they're still available. Boy, something about going out and learning to identify plants and animals and learning their habits and habitats, but actually being able to come home with food for the table. It just lit up a whole bunch of circuits that, especially, and this is one of the things why I sometimes think birds are not the best thing to get little kids interested in nature. If you can have a banding thing or maybe a rehab bird and the bird can be up close or in the hand, that can work really well. But a lot of times kids, we sort of want to put something in a jar or, at least have it up close. And boy, the foraging thing, you're having a very direct relationship with nature.
Well, and I plan on doing that as an upcoming show, is the foraging thing. It's become huge. There's
like a whole second or third wave of it. And
yes.
Yule Gibbons was the avatar of it when I was a kid. But, there's a whole new group like this. I mentioned this mushroom foray that we went on with the Philadelphia Mycological Association last weekend. A tremendous resource. And, a lot of those things you can't eat. A lot of them won't kill you, but they won't taste good. And then a few of them, are really delicious, and trying to get the whole picture. So it's not just about what you can catch and consume.
Well,
you're really learning the whole thing.
And it's a great way to get people involved. I still think, I don't mean this to sound sexist, but the great way to get little boys involved is herps. Give them lizards and snakes to hold. To your point, you can hold that, and even if you're at a banding station, you're only supposed to, you hold on to the bird for a few seconds and stuff. But if you catch a lizard and or a snake or something as a little boy, you can hold it for a little bit. And there's something about that, there's something tactile about that relative to seeing a Kentucky warbler, 30 yards away flitting through the leaves.
There's a lot of female expert herpetologists. So I don't think it's gender based, and I don't think you meant that, but
no, I did not know.
There is something, I don't know. There is something about the classic, crazy little boy that interaction with catching the animal, like it focuses the mind.
Well,
and
it does.
You do remember these things. I mean, I remember a couple of grabs that I made that were successful and a couple others where I missed.
Yep.
But those are some peak memories too.
Well, I can remember, we had a pretty big field out behind the house, and my parents were not outdoors people at all. If they never had to go outdoors, I think that would have been a really good thing for them. They just didn't care about it much, but I did. And so we used to put old 4x8 sheets of plywood out in this field. And then, wait a couple of weeks and then go by and check. And I mean, there would be, you'd flip that thing up. There'd be insects pouring out and alligator lizards and, garden snakes. And it was a treasure trove. It was Christmas morning. Every time we'd flip that thing over.
Yep. Well, and making insect collections, getting the cigar box and pinning different insects. And of course, you don't have to kill everything. One thing we did, we raised monarch butterflies. So we would find the eggs and bring the milkweed inside and go through the whole life cycle. And I mean, that was amazing, formative stuff. And it catches anybody's attention, but I think it can catch kids' attention in a way that sometimes a distant thing is harder.
Yep. Yeah, it is a blast. I had 30-something terrariums in my bedroom as a kid, and I had
a room full of snakes and fish.
I had snakes and frogs and toads and lizards and loved it, And anyway, Jeff, I really appreciate you being on, man, and we will do it again, and I will look forward to that. For those of you listening, I'm going to ask you a favor. If you can subscribe and maybe click like and put a comment. I know you hear that all the time on podcasts, but it really does make a difference. The more people that do those three things, subscribe, comment, and like, the more people will find the show and be able to listen to guys like Jeff, our last guest, Cy Montgomery, and bring these different perspectives, and in many ways can be life changing and life affirming. So I would be thrilled if you could do that. Stay tuned for field notes. And Jeff, I don't know if you're aware of it, but at the end of every podcast, I do that little 5 to 10 minute thing on something, not always birds. It could be any number of things. And honestly, that's a tremendous amount of fun for me. And the one from Cy last time, we did octopus because she's written so many books about octopus.
Nice.
And so
Can I
those
get
are,
a sneak peek of what's coming after this one?
as far as what the field notes would be,
Mm-hmm.
I haven't decided
Okay.
what that might be, but you know what? I was thinking about doing one on the ivory-billed woodpecker based on our conversation,
Mm-hmm.
because I think a lot of people, that is what I'm going to do. A lot of
Okay.
people aren't aware of that story and how mythical that is. It's a holy grail Loch Ness monster passenger pigeon thing
Mm-hmm.
for not just birders, but for naturalists. You know what, Jeff? That's it. You've inspired me. Ivory-billed woodpecker it is.
It's
So
a great story, even has tragedy, but it's a
it does.
amazing animal.
Stay tuned for that, and hopefully you'll learn some things that you didn't know about the ivory-billed woodpecker. I agree with Jeff. I think they probably are extinct, but I'm going to leave a little sliver of hope out there, because there might be an 8-year-old girl who's just getting into birding and makes it her life work and finds it.
You can always get that 11th hour Tropicbird or polar bear.
That's exactly right. And maybe you don't even have to tip sideways in the plane in order to get that. So as always, man, when you're outdoors, and I hope you are outdoors often, be safe and stay curious. Jeff, thank you again for joining us today. And everybody have a terrific day. Good morning and welcome to this edition of Field Notes. Thanks for joining me. I always appreciate that. If it's your first time in, Field Notes is a special little segment we do with every podcast where we pick one bird or animal or park or issue and highlight that for a few minutes, just chat about it, take a little bit of a deeper dive. And it has turned out to be a favorite of the viewers and listeners. So thank you very much. And I got to tell you, I love doing it too. I love doing the research and checking things out and then sharing what I find with you guys, and especially enjoy the feedback that I get when people have an opportunity to write me. So today, if you had a chance, this field note is attached to the Jeff Gordon podcast. If you're watching this directly, you will know, or if you've seen the podcast before, that we discussed ivory-billed woodpeckers for a while, and I thought that would be a fun one to do today. Ivory-billed woodpeckers are considered extinct by most, but not by everybody, and that's part of what we're going to talk about today. They were last seen in 1944 in the United States, which means there's probably a handful of people alive that have seen them, assuming they were 7, 8 years old and bird astute at the time. They would be close to 90 now. And the term, by the way, is universally accepted. The last time they were seen was 1944. Because we're going to talk about, there have been some people that think they have seen them since. There was also a ivory-billed woodpecker in Cuba, and that was last seen in 1987, again using the term universally accepted. Ivory-billed woodpeckers, the Cuban and the American, are subspecies of the same bird. So there's a Cuban ivory-billed woodpecker and an American ivory-billed woodpecker. There are those that are still debating and discussing whether they should be historically listed as two separate species. And of course, those debates are ongoing all the time, whether something is a standalone species or a subspecies. And so that'll be fun to see how that plays out. The ivory-billed woodpecker was the largest woodpecker in the United States. It was a huge bird, and it was the third largest woodpecker in the world when it existed. The world's largest woodpecker at the time was Mexico's imperial woodpecker, which has now not been seen since the 1950s. This does not bode well for large woodpeckers, I guess. Now, the ivory-billed woodpecker favored bottomland hardwood forests. That is where it spent most of its time. There is some discussion about whether it spent some time in swamps or not, but it is generally agreed that bottomland hardwood forests were the preferred habitat of the ivory-billed woodpecker, and when you could see them, the most likely place to see them. They literally have an ivory-covered bill, hence the name, and not surprising, but not all names of birds are actually accurate in that area. The colors sometimes are misused or descriptions are misused in the name. With the ivory-billed woodpecker, they got that one right. In the hardwood forest, they love to eat beetles and beetle larvae. That was their preferred food. But they also ate vegetation. They ate pecans and acorns and hickory nuts and persimmons. Back in 2004 and 2005, there were multiple sightings of the ivory-billed woodpecker, and some of them by people who were prominent enough and experienced enough to be taken seriously. There is even something called the Lundau video, which is purported to show a live ivory-billed woodpecker. Now, those that think that it is extinct and has been for 60 plus years think these are pileated woodpeckers. And pileated woodpeckers are now our largest woodpecker and have a similar look to the ivory-billed woodpecker. And I am not saying that the people that claim to have saw it didn't. I wasn't there, and so I don't know. And this is not like a Loch Ness monster or a Sasquatch. It's not make-believe. This bird actually did exist, and it existed in for some people their lifetime. So while it is likely that it was a pileated that was seen, it is not factually so. And as a matter of fact, some of these were serious enough that Cornell Lab, our premier lab of ornithology in the country, perhaps the world, partnered with some others, and they spent 4 years, 2006 to 2010, looking for the woodpecker. So the reports were serious enough that they went and did that. They covered 500,000 acres in 8 states, and unfortunately, they could not find an example of a living pileated or of a living ivory-billed woodpecker. So it is interesting that even Cornell had not given up. In 2021, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service proposed labeling the ivory-billed woodpecker extinct. The public pushed back against that yet. They weren't ready to, at least some of us weren't ready to admit that it was extinct, and they pushed back with enough evidence and stories and passion, frankly, that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service backed off, did not consider it extinct, and off it went. And so this is kind of one of those fun things about birding and frankly about nature is, I've met a couple people that have gone and looked for the Loch Ness monster and have a belief that it's there. And while there's no proof that it's ever been there, I think it's kind of a fun thing to believe. And there are certainly things in this world alive that we have not seen. We are discovering, especially among bird and insects, we are discovering new things all the time. It's a little arrogant to think that we actually know for a fact that some of these things don't exist, or that there might not be an ivory-billed woodpecker family living somewhere in the hardwood forests of Arkansas, which is where it's those who believe that it's alive think that's the most likely place. And so I think there's some joy in that. Is it a ghost? Is it a legend? Is it a myth? Is it extinct or is it not? Does it really matter? If people are getting enjoyment going out and looking for it and discussing it and researching it and want to keep on doing that, my goodness, let them do it. And I got to tell you, man, I hope they find it. I would love for that to be confirmed and to head down to Arkansas and see if I couldn't find an ivory-billed woodpecker myself. But until that happens, stay safe, stay curious, and thanks for watching today.